This channel, as you know, exists mainly in the now. My videos are dedicated to thinking about how to make our 21st century life better, and to waging battle on ideas that make it worse. And yet, you also know that occasionally I wander into the past, discussing movements and artists from eras gone by. It seems that I have a different audience for these videos, and only a minority among my subscribers view both types of videos. Many of you probably find very little connection between the two. To me, however, they are one and the same. Our history is part of who we are, and if your aim is to be happier, your approach towards history plays a big part in it. In this video, by engaging with the thought of some well-known philosophers, I'll try to outline my view on how history should be consumed, processed, thought of, internalized, and utilized. On the most basic level, knowledge of history can make your life better because it helps you appreciate what you have. From my reading, I know what lengths people used to go to, how far they had to travel, just to watch a masterpiece of painting or hear a musical composition. The fact that I can find and experience it all in a matter of seconds, while remaining here on YouTube, makes me grateful for what I have. And occasionally I take a step back and marvel at the thing that makes it possible: my computer. It is not just an electrical device. It represents, and contains within it, thousands of years of human thought and ingenuity in the fields of mathematics, logic, physics, chemistry, electronics, cybernetics, and AI. And when I look around me, at my home, everything is imbued with spirit. Every piece of furniture, every electrical appliance, every kitchen utensil, the abundance of food in my fridge, from many different cultures, the water running in my tap, my bathroom, each attest to the ingenuity of humans, and I can revel in this ingenuity while also enjoying it, and understand how much more comfortable it makes my life compared to the people of the past. In short, by merely being aware of the past, you feel better about your present. This, however, applies to technology, and technology, by its nature, always advances. When it comes to other aspects of human existence, like morality, social cohesion, peace, mental health, and so forth, it becomes more complicated. Are things getting better over time? And if they are, can we be sure that they will continue to do so? Is our future in our hands, or are we ruled by bigger forces that determine our fate? How can we use our study of history to improve our individual well-being? These questions are what philosophy deals with, and this is what this video shall deal with. Naturally, I will come at it from a Nietzschean perspective, and this video is part of my ongoing series on Nietzsche. We shall discuss some other thinkers as well, mainly Hegel. But this is, first and foremost, my philosophy, and how it applies to today's struggles. You may have noticed that along with talking about history, I've already introduced another idea, the idea of progress. And when we talk about this idea, Hegel is the philosopher we should begin with. When I discussed Hegel in past videos, I always prefaced it by saying that I'm going to ignore the ontological side of his thought, because it is too complicated to get into, and I warn that this means my presentation is not entirely accurate. Today, since we are talking history, I will try to explain it. For our purpose I shall be drawing from just one of his texts, Preface to the Phenomenology of Spirit, considered his first significant work. This was a prelude to his magnum opus, The Phenomenology of Spirit, and it is a relatively small text, but a very packed one. If you are going to read just one of his books, or if you're looking for a place to start, this is the one you should read. With good guidance, you should be able to understand it, and it gives you the gist of Hegel's thought. To get the essence of Hegel, I believe, there are two main influences, two philosophers, that should be mentioned. First, Aristotle. One of the philosophical conundrums Aristotle had to deal with was the idea that an oak tree and the acorn it came from are the same thing. We know that this acorn will produce an oak, so we refer to it as an oak. But an acorn and a tree are obviously very different, and this goes against one of the main laws of Aristotle's logic, which determines that a thing must be identical to itself. Aristotle solved this problem by saying that the oak exists in the acorn as potential that grows until it is fulfilled. The acorn is an oak because it cannot grow into anything but an oak, but it is an oak that is not fully actualized. These concepts of potential and actualization, which Aristotle introduced into Western thought, allowed it to conceive of things as growing through time while remaining essentially the same. The other thinker is Spinoza, the 17th century philosopher of enlightenment. Spinoza was a heretic against the traditional idea of God. Traditionally, we perceive God as a metaphysical, conscious being, who stands apart from the material universe. Spinoza regarded God and the universe as one and the same. But if God is the universe, where is his consciousness? Well, it exists collectively in the conscious beings, the humans. Every one of our minds is part of the mind of God. This means that we see things only partly, so our thinking, despite its divine nature, is subject to fallacies and wrongdoing. By exploring into the nature of our universe, we clear up our mind and come closer to our divine nature. The more we know, the godlier we become, and thus we become better and happier individuals. And from this superior vantage point we can also look deeper into nature and understand it even more, and thus become even godlier, and so forth. This advancement, for Spinoza, is done on the individual level. Every individual is responsible for their own advancement, their own happiness. Put these two ideas together, and you basically get Hegel. Like Spinoza, Hegel believes that the universe is one entity, and the conscious side of this entity is carried in the minds of humans. But while Spinoza's God remains the same, Hegel sees him as growing to actualize himself, in the Aristotelian manner. He doesn't call this entity God, but spirit, and the spirit grows through history, through the explorations of humans. While for Spinoza it was left for every individual to explore into their nature and come closer to God, for Hegel it's a project that humanity works on, as it progresses through history and thus comes closer and closer to its fully actualized form. In its initial state, at the dawn of civilization, the spirit was like an acorn, and humans lived by their instincts, without reflection on their life. Then, individuals started to try to understand their reality, to form ideas about it, and even theories about the laws governing it, the purpose it leads to, and the meaning behind it. These ideas and theories spread, and this spread brought growth to the spirit, but this growth meant that humans were now different, and the reality they were trying to understand was different, so they had to form more advanced theories about it, bringing further growth. Through this historical process, the spirit gradually actualizes itself, and the end result would be when humans become fully aware of their nature, and coexist with each other in a free society. Let's say it another way. The conscious side of the spirit is carried collectively in the minds of all humans. When a human looks at nature and tries to understand it, it's basically the spirit trying to understand itself. And humans are driven to do this, to explore nature, because they feel a push to actualize themselves, actualize the spirit. Whenever an individual comes up with a new idea, it means that the spirit now has a new idea, and the most advanced humans embody where the spirit is at this point in history. But they are still not satisfied, because they are not fully actualized. The individual that feels this way feels that what culture tells him they are is actually not true. So they rebel and form a new idea about who they are. This, however, makes them stand apart from society, alienated from it, and they cannot be happy this way. They must therefore synthesize their new ideas with the culturally predominant ones to find their way back into society. This brings new ideas into culture, and the spirit progresses some more. Hegel believed that his time represented the moment when the spirit finally developed the ideas needed for full actualization. All that was left now is for them to spread to all humans. To visualize it, let's use the matrix. Imagine that the matrix didn't have an architect, but was just a set of laws of nature, and everything else in it was created collectively in the minds of the humans trapped in it. Initially, the matrix put these humans in primitive settings, where they lived in tribes and were controlled by the forces of nature. But it also determined that their true nature is to be free individuals who are in control of nature. Some humans then realize that their reality isn't as it should be, and manage to wake up and escape the matrix. But outside the matrix there is nothing but desolation. To be happy, they have to be in the matrix, among their fellow humans, so they go back in. However, they come back in with a completely new understanding of who they are, and they synthesize this understanding with the reality of the matrix to form a new worldview. This worldview gives them greater control over the matrix, over nature. This also means that the matrix has new ideas in it, and it changes as a result. But it is still not fully actualized, so the people in it still feel alienated. Other individuals then wake up and go out of it, but when they analyze it, they analyze something different from before, so they come up with newer, more advanced ideas. They bring these ideas back in, changing the matrix again, and so forth. The matrix grows through the process, and if we continue our analogy, it is designed to eventually arrive at a point where all humans are free individuals who are aware of the matrix and how to use it to their benefit, and coexist in a society that protects their freedoms. I hope this very short presentation helped you understand Hegel better. Hegel's thought, we see, was still rooted in a world that had notions of man being the crown of creation, and the universe designed to ensure his happiness. The 19th century largely dispelled these notions. We no longer believe that humanity, by nature, is destined to end up as a free society. But even if you take this dimension out of Hegel's thought, there is still a lot in it that has merit. We do see ideas grow and change through history. We do see man gaining greater control over nature. We do see progress happening as a result of synthesis between conflicting ideas, and we do see human societies becoming more sophisticated and discerning, allowing greater freedom to their individual members. When we examine these historical trends, Hegel's writings provide a lot of useful insights. Here we shall discuss just some of them. One insight that was very central to modern thinking, but later, as we shall see, became less popular, is the idea that every new step in this process maintains within it all the previous steps. In Hegel's view, the growth of the spirit builds upon what has already been learned. This means that we cannot skip any step. A human culture cannot just jump from being a primitive tribe to being a modern free society, but has to go through all the stages other cultures went through. In the process, the spirit becomes ever more intricate, as every step contains within it every idea and every synthesis achieved in previous stages. This intricacy allows it to better handle the diversity found in reality. As an example, let's talk about the idea of a global society. Hegel, we said, believed that the spirit must inevitably grow to become a free society, like an acorn is destined to become an oak. He believed that in his time, the spirit already developed the understanding that this is its goal, as well as all the ideas needed to maintain such a society. However, this idea exists only in the minds of some Europeans. It still needs to spread and become global, before the spirit completes its full actualization. Then again, when we examine an acorn, we can't yet tell what shape this oak tree would be like. Every oak is slightly different from the next. Similarly, Hegel believed that full actualization means that humanity will still be divided into many nation-states, each presenting its own version of a free society. It will not be a global society. This idea of the end of history is acceptable to many of us, but is not good enough for some. Some people believe that only a global society can bring world peace, and only this can be counted as full actualization. This idea existed since the 19th century, and in the 1990s, after the end of the Cold War, seemed reachable. People started to seriously talk about the end of history in the Hegelian sense. The idea was that if we globalize the economy, the ideals of capitalism will spread to the unfree societies, and liberalism will inevitably follow. Eventually, it was believed, we will end up with a global democratic society based on the ideas of free market and individual freedom. But this, from a Hegelian perspective, meant that the globalization process was started before the previous step was completed. That is, before all nation-states became democratic. As a result, it could then be abused by the non-democratic states to spread their ideas into the global market. Islamists use global media to promote global jihad, aiming to make the entire world Muslim. The Chinese Communist Party found many ways to use the global economy to its benefit, to stay in power and spread Chinese influence around the globe. And Russia, that has imperialist plans to swallow the countries around it, uses the aforementioned tools to try to undermine Western democracies, to prevent them from standing in its way. As a result, there is a backlash against the idea of globalism, leading to the re-emergence of nationalism, in Western democracies as well as other places, and the dream of a global society is crumbling. Then again, we will not go back to the world we had before. The world has been irrevocably globalized, to some extent. The fact that I just finished this video, and you can already watch it on the other side of the globe, is only one aspect of it. Barring some major catastrophe, this is not going to go away. There are several ways to interpret this, while engaging with Hegel's thought. First, you can simply discard the whole idea of progress, conclude that Hegel was wrong, that history has no direction, and that we should therefore refrain from trying to direct ourselves towards a future endpoint. But if you choose to believe in Hegelian progress, there are two ways to look at it. First, we can deduce that Hegel was right, that free nation-states are the endpoint we are marching towards, and globalization processes are therefore just a part of the spread of Western ideas to other countries, helping them become free. Or you can say that Hegel was right about the process but wrong about the endpoint, and that we are marching towards a global society. In this case, you would say that the globalist push of the 90s was simply premature, and was actually just a step that was needed to spread ideas into the non-democratic countries, part of the process of them becoming democratic, which would then make it possible to form a global society. Personally, I don't believe in a historical endpoint. I also, of course, don't believe that there is such a thing as a spirit that goes through history. But I do think that there is such a thing as the spirit of the time, a spirit that permeates the minds of all people living in a certain period, who create it together. When we look at it this way, we find that there are things that are healthier than others to that spirit. Globalization was right for the 90s. Now, the healthier approach is to emphasize nationalism. My focus, then, is on the Zeitgeist, the spirit of the time, and what is best for it. But to understand the spirit of the time, I do find some of Hegel's insights to be quite useful. Let's throw another one of those insights into the mix. Yes, the spirit contains within it all the past steps that got it here. However, the individual human, unless they study history, are not familiar with these previous steps. They are familiar with the values of their time, but not with why these values were formed, or how they solve the conflicts that used to rid society. Hegel likens it to someone who is familiar with the theorems of geometry, but doesn't know how to prove them. Thus, they don't understand all the intricacies of the current situation, how the values of our society improve our lives. Because of that, they don't know how to defend these values, and don't appreciate what they have. This makes them vulnerable to ideologies that want to take it away. This is particularly true when a culture loses its orientation. Take, for instance, what happened when the modern age ended. The modern age, starting in late 18th century, was driven by the idea of progress and oriented towards creating heaven on earth. But by the late 1960s, the belief in the possibility of utopia, or even the desirability of utopia, largely collapsed. Modern society lost its highest purpose. Still, you could say that we should hold on to its values because of all the great things modern progress brought us. But most people took these things for granted, not realizing it was modern values they had to thank for having them. This brought a re-emergence of religious movements, seeking to fill the void. The religious felt that since the idea of heaven on earth failed, they could now orient people back into believing in striving for heaven in the afterlife. This happened most strongly in the Muslim world, and since then, Islamist movements managed to undermine the power of the modern, socialist regimes that ruled many Muslim countries at the time. It also happened in America, where Christian evangelists felt they had the power to become a lot more dominant. They did get stronger for a while, but they ultimately failed, and the reason for that, I contend, was that they didn't realize that the modern age was replaced by a new age, what I call the pop age, which had its own rationale, its own orientation. I mark the beginning of the pop age around 1915. The spirit of the pop age, born in America, no longer thinks about progressing towards the future, but sees the present as already good enough and seeks ways to make the most of it. The modern consciousness was created by the bourgeoisie, those who tend to define themselves by their profession, whereas the pop consciousness is created by the proletariat, who don't identify with their line of work. So while the modern mind values work, that is, activity that is done for the sake of something else, the pop mind values play, that is, activity that is done for its own sake. Because of this, while modern people usually defined themselves by what they did for a living, pop age people define themselves by what they do in their leisure time. The pop age is what we are in now, and it proved strong enough to beat back the attempts to go back to pre-modern orientations. The 50 years between 1915 and 1965 were a transitional phase, in which the modern age, with its European rationale, withered and died, and the pop age, with its American rationale, took its place. I call it the Hollywood period, and the spirit of that period was about enjoying the moment, while still taking part in modern progress. In 1955 began what I call the rock and roll period, and it was about enjoying the extended moment, creating temporary utopias that lasted a year or two, and then moving on to the next utopia. This was the new idea that replaced the modern idea of a future utopia, and it eventually defeated the rise of religious fundamentalism, at least in the West. The rock and roll period lasted until 2005, and the tail end of it witnessed a sharp decline in the power of religion in America. What I just described fits in nicely with two more Hegelian insights. You might wonder, wait, does Hegel even believe in historical periods? Doesn't he see history as one continuous progress, just little steps that come one after the other? Yes, there are periods in Hegel's history, and the metaphor he uses is the birth of a baby. The fetus grows and grows, every moment brings another step in its growth, but then it reaches a moment when it is fully grown, and it is born into the world, becoming something else. Similarly, history has these sharp breaks that bring the birth of a new period. Every period progresses through little baby steps, but at some point, all the changes reach a critical mass and a new paradigm is born, taking over the culture. This is the first insight. The second is what happens once a new period is born. The reason why it is born, the reason why the fetus becomes a baby, is that the previous period resolved all its major inner conflicts, achieved a satisfactory synthesis. The synthesized rationale can now take over, become the basis for a new paradigm. Once it does, however, the people born into it accept those resolutions as self-evident, and don't know the reasoning behind them. Also, these resolutions didn't completely resolve the conflicts, so all of them are now reopened, revolving around new issues. The new rationale tackles these problems, but in this initial stage, when it is still a newborn baby, it is felt as empty, devoid of content. All the ways of thinking seem richer, and therefore become appealing to many people. The new period is thus vulnerable, suffering from many conflicts and threatened by more traditional ways of thinking, and has to work its way out of it by resolving all the new issues. We shall soon provide an example that will make it clearer. Before that, I want to talk more about the periods of history as I define them, and also to introduce another philosopher into our discussion. I divide the modern age into 4 periods. From 1790 to 1840 is what I call the Romantic period, and it was typified by a revolutionary spirit that wished to establish a new world. Hegel wrote during this period, but he rejected Romantic enthusiasm, the belief that a new world can be established right away, in favor of slow, incremental progress. Also, while Romantics regarded modern thought as a radical break from the past, he described it as the continuation of a process that began at the dawn of civilization. His views became predominant in the next period, which I call the Novel Period, lasting from 1830 to 1875. By then, the liberal order already took over some countries, and was busy perfecting itself. The idea that this order was the actualization of a growth process that began at the dawn of civilization now became predominant, and many other thinkers came up with their own theories of how this progress occurred. One of these thinkers was Karl Marx. Marx, however, differed from most of those thinkers in that he did not believe liberal society is the endpoint. While liberal thinkers believed we have already achieved the goal, and now we just need to preserve and perfect it, and help it spread to all corners of the globe, he believed that there was one more revolution needed. Hegel's mistake, he argued, was that he focused on the spirit as a driving force, when in fact he should have focused on matter. The story of human progress is a story of man learning how to conquer nature, in order to create enough food and other goods for the welfare of everyone. Since there wasn't enough to begin with, the strongest humans enslaved the weaker ones and made them work and produce for them, creating an oppressor and oppressed class. This, however, went against human nature, which is to live in a world where we all share the wealth and have what we need. This nature still has to actualize itself, and until that day, both oppressor and oppressed are not happy. The economic system created by the oppressor class is insufficient, but it is the best humanity can come up with at that stage, until the means of production advance to the point where they can be the basis for a better system. The idea of the better system is then created, and the oppressed adopt it and revolt, putting the new system in place and ushering in a new period in history. This new system, however, still doesn't create enough to provide for everyone, so society is divided once again into 2 classes, and an oppressive relationship that remains until we get to the point when another revolution is possible. How many more historical periods, economic systems, and revolutions do we have to go through until we reach final actualization? Well, good news. Marx theorized there's just one revolution left. The economic system of the liberal order is the capitalist system, in which the bourgeoisie oppressed the proletariat. But capitalism brought 2 major advancements. First, it spreads all over the globe, erasing every other culture, and will eventually create a global society in which the only remaining identities are the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Secondly, it is the first system that actually ended up creating the means of production that can provide for everyone. Once it completes its spread over the globe, the proletariat will rise in revolt, and then there will be no more classes, but a global communist society that will use these means of production to provide for everyone, and share the wealth. With that, unfortunately, Marx unwittingly introduced no less than 4 highly pernicious ideas into Western thought. First, since he made matter the measurement of progress, it allowed him to treat history as an exact science, and claim that one can create mathematical equations to follow economic trends, and thus predict the future. Marx, and the Marxists that followed, dangerously believed that humanity has but one possible future, and that they can predict what it is. The second idea is that society is not one organic body, but divided into an oppressor and oppressed classes. This pernicious idea brought division and strife to practically every human society, and continues to do so to this day. The third idea is that the oppressed class are the more advanced, the ones that are closer to the truth, since they are the ones who carry out the revolutions that bring progress. This resulted in the silly notion that we should believe the oppressed, no matter the situation. And the fourth and final pernicious idea, a truly vicious one, is that since we are one step away from utopia, it means that anyone who stands in the way of the revolution are evil people, people who are denying happiness from all humankind, and therefore we are permitted to eliminate these people by all means necessary. These 4 ideas did massive damage since the day they were put forth, to this day. The next period was what I call the Modernist Period, that began in 1865 and lasted until 1925. During this period, the last vestiges of the feudal order collapsed all over Europe, and the liberal order took over. This was when people actually started to refer to themselves as modern, and distinguish themselves from pre-modern periods. It became common sense that our goal is to advance towards an earthly utopia. At the same time, it became apparent that it is not at all certain that we are advancing towards that utopia. Some even argued that contemporary culture is not the result of progress, as the Hegelians claimed, but actually the thing that prevents us from reaching utopia. Culture and traditions were now seen as a hindrance, the result of straying from the path at some point. Those who claimed that still believed that our nature is to live in utopia, but argued that contemporary culture is burying our true nature, masking the truth that will liberate us. And this meant that the individual could now play a greater role in the process of human progress. The individual, in the novel period, lost some of the heroic aura they had in the romantic period. Since historical processes were inevitably taking us towards utopia anyway, it didn't leave much room for individual heroism. The individualists of that period found their truth in a realm outside of human society, usually a transcendent realm beyond the physical plane. But in the modernist period, individuals felt that they could use their particular abilities to figure out the truth that the traditions are hiding, and thus help liberate humankind, put us back on the right track. In art, this was a period of breaking all the old aesthetic norms in favor of the personal vision of the artist, who tried to show the essence of reality. In politics, radical leftists turned to acts of terrorism, believing this would somehow shake the ruling liberal order, and wake the people up to realize that it is not the ideal reality, and they should adopt communism instead. Before we continue with the historical periods, let's apply Hegel's insights to a specific conflict, to the story of black people in America. The novel period was about the rise of the liberal order, and in this order, slavery was unacceptable. In America, the period was typified by fervent abolitionist activism, leading, towards the end of it, to a civil war to free the slaves. The modernist period begins with the freeing of the slaves, and the attempt to reconstruct American society based on racial equality while at the same time reintegrating the North with the South. This was still in the transitional phase between the novel and modernist periods, so the mainstream idea was still about keeping the traditions of the past while bringing this new modern world of racial equality. By the end of the transitional phase, however, it became apparent that the attempts at racial integration failed, and the orientation of the new period felt weak, causing people, as Hegel warned, to fall back to the older notions of racial separation. The result was the establishment of the segregation system, known as Jim Crow. Why did racial integration fail? Well, it is always hard for slaves to learn how to suddenly live as free people, but also, it failed because blacks may have been free now, but culturally, they were still seen as the other of American culture. This was the result, first of all, of old prejudices about African people, which Americans needed time to get over, but also the result of modern thought itself. Remember, the Hegelian view is that some people are more advanced than others, representing where the spirit is at. Whites believe that they were the more advanced ones, while the blacks are still lagging behind, still partly in the jungle. So they couldn't just let them bring their backwards customs into the culture. During the Modernist period, the Americans became a nation, and by the end of that period they were the strongest nation in the world, but they did so while keeping the blacks out. Black Americans were citizens of the country, but were not regarded part of the nation. The liberal reaction to this was to work on advancing blacks to the level of whites, and both blacks and whites worked together on this project, efforts that led, by the end of the period, to the Harlem Renaissance. But there were also blacks who were affected by the more radical modernist approach, the one that rejected liberal society as a solution, and they regarded American culture as racist and repressive by nature, and called on blacks to resist integration. The next period, lasting from 1915 to 1965, is what I call the late modernist period, and it sees the fall of European culture. If the modernist period was typified by individuals who believed they could break away from liberal society and find the truth that will liberate us, now it became movements that believed they knew the truth that will liberate us, and had the right to impose it on everyone to create the perfect world. Marxism manifested as totalitarian regimes that try to impose a communist order and murder or enslave those who didn't fall in line. At the same time, extreme right-wing thinkers push the idea that the nation, or the race, must be purified of foreign elements before a perfect society can be created, and fascist totalitarian movements try to carry it out. Individualists, in this period, did not see themselves as pioneers showing the way to the rest of humanity, but as those who escaped the horrors of society to live an autonomous existence, usually just retracted into their inner world. Modernist art, meanwhile, basically became anti-art, as artists mocked all pre-existing concepts of beauty. The result was the decline of Europe. These processes had an effect on America as well, of course. The period saw a rise in overt racism, as white racists believed that the black man, as someone who is still not out of the jungle, cannot progress and become enlightened, and therefore must be kept out of American culture. At the same time, some black Americans joined Marxist movements, believing that only revolution can bring racial equality. But this was also the transitional phase to the pop age, the Hollywood period. This period, as mentioned, was about utilizing modern progress in order to enjoy the moment, and this gave black Americans the opportunity to play an active and major part and gradually integrate in society. The people who had a pop mindset did not regard going back to the jungle as a bad thing, but enjoyed the wildness and physical prowess that blacks could offer. Black athletes and black jazz musicians excelled at their profession and provided many moments of joy to all Americans. America's pop culture proved stronger than the totalitarian ideologies and helped keep the country liberal. By the end of this period, the last vestiges of segregation and racially discriminatory laws were gone. To understand what happened next, let's apply Hegel's insights again. Those who had a modern mindset or even those who had the mindset of the Hollywood period, believed that once discriminatory laws would be abolished, it would lead to greater racial harmony. But remember Hegel's wisdom. Once a synthesis is achieved, it is taken as self-evident, and then the conflict is reawakened around the new issues that the synthesis created or failed to resolve. Once blacks were equal by law, they also expected to be treated equally by society, get an equal chance to live the American dream. Culturally, however, blacks were still very different, still regarded as the other of American culture, a fact that, of course, also hampered their ability to advance in society. How did they react to it? Well, the older black Americans, those who remembered the struggles of the Hollywood period, could appreciate what they had, and believe these problems will also be resolved in time. But the young generation, who grew up learning that they are equal, felt themselves entitled to have equality right away. Thus, they didn't appreciate the good in the liberal American society, and saw only the bad. Furthermore, since the modern age was dead, the idea that liberalism can lead to future equality lost its certainty. Meanwhile, the rock and roll period was still in its infancy, and hadn't yet developed its answers to the problems. In this stage, Hegel tells us, many fall back on older ways of thinking that seem stronger and richer. In the late 60s, some youngsters became Marxist revolutionaries, believing that the loss of belief that liberalism can lead us to utopia means that people are finally waking up to understand that there's a better alternative. In black culture, this led to the rise of revolutionary black power movements, like the Black Panthers. Of course, their belief that they were going to wake up the people and bring revolution was completely detached from reality. The people were no longer in the modern mindset. Meanwhile, some European intellectuals realized that the modern orientation was dead, but didn't realize America is already offering an alternative. The result was postmodernism, a spiritual dead end that we shall discuss later. In America, meanwhile, most intellectuals were also thinking along European lines, but these lines were alien to American culture, and the result was that they came up with something a lot dumber than postmodernism. They realized that they must abandon the Marxist belief in historical determinism, but they did so without abandoning the three other pernicious Marxist ideas that we mentioned, even though these ideas are predicated on the first idea. The result was the rise, marginal at first, of what I call creationist leftism. The creationist leftists no longer believe that the current so-called oppressive system evolved over time, but see it as the result of a single act of creation, which divided human civilization into oppressor and oppressed, and rules our mind ever since. In black American culture, it manifested in the Nation of Islam, which believes the initial humans were black and spiritual, but then, over 6,000 years ago, an evil scientist created the white race, which eventually took over and established its wicked order. These evil white people also erased true history, and made all of us believe in fake history and ideals, designed to preserve the racist rule, and only the Nation of Islam has figured out the true history, by deciphering clues that were left behind. Creationist leftism is a great example of what it looks like when you try to interpret present-day reality using ideas taken from previous periods, ideas that have lost the framework that gave them sense. The pop mindset, meanwhile, was in the rock and roll period, and offered an alternative orientation, temporary utopias in the here and now, instead of a future utopia. This meant that we no longer believe that there is such a thing as a universal man, which all of humanity takes part in his creation. This, in turn, led to the awareness that this mythic universal man was created in the image of the European man, meaning that this image, throughout the modern age, created biases against women, non-whites, and LGBT. Members of these groups started to use the mediums of pop culture, especially pop music, to liberate themselves and express pride in who they are, and not accept the superiority of the straight white male. In the 70s, black pop moved away from white pop, creating a distinctly black culture. But then the natural thing happened, and by the 80s, this black pop started to synthesize with white pop, but this time as cultural equals. For the first time, black Americans started to be viewed as all Americans, no longer the other of American identity. By the end of the rock and roll period, it already became possible for a black man to be elected President of the United States. Once this synthesis was achieved, however, it opened new problems. Now that blacks are seen as all American, it is hard for those who grew into this reality to fathom how it was possible for their country to treat them so badly in the past. Black youngsters thus feel animosity towards their country, while white youngsters feel shame and guilt, and they are both alienated from American values. We are currently at a stage when the American spirit accepted blacks as part of it, but black spirit did not yet accept that it is part of America. Finding the synthesis that would allow them to do so, in my view, is the mission of the current period, which I call the Cyber Period. But the synthesis was not found yet, so many blacks fall to older ways of thinking. Creationist leftism, which was a laughable curiosity in the rock and roll period, became the radical left of the Cyber Period, backed by academics who give it legitimacy. Those creationists that exploit race issues to promote their ideology claim that our civilization is ruled by a structure called whiteness, which divides humanity into the oppressive white race and the oppressed people of color, and that the only way to achieve equality is to bring down whiteness. In other words, bring down liberal democracy. Other groups adopted similar creationist, anti-liberal ideas. These ideas are currently infecting left-wing mainstream discourse as well. And this is how we got to the mess we are in today. Okay, what was the point of this historical overview? What am I trying to say about how history helps life? The point is that what currently feels like a regression in race relations in America is not a failure of American society, but the natural way historical processes occur. Taking a broader perspective, it currently feels like liberalism is in decline, that liberal society is doomed, and this leads many to despair. But if we look at it in the way that I proposed, we see that it's not in decline. It's just an ebb. We're at a point where the spirit of the Cyber Period did not yet resolve the conflicts it brought with it, and the racial tensions are one of the results. If you accept this picture of historic processes, it means that you should not despair, but keep on working on resolving the issues, because this current conflict is just part of creating racial harmony on an even higher level than before. The same goes for the other problems liberal society currently deals with. The study of Hegel's thought, then, is helpful today in two main ways. First, by studying Hegel and Marx, we understand the orientations that dominated recent human history and are still part of our culture and thought. We can thus learn to identify them better, understand how they still control us, and figure out how to orient ourselves towards them. Secondly, if you accept my view that we are now in the pop age, it provides helpful insights. I agree with Hegel that we have reached the end of our development when it comes to the nature of society, but unlike him, I don't see this as the end of history. Rather, the drama of the spirit now takes place in the realm of our leisure activities. But we also still need to fight to protect our liberal society, the society that allows us to have this realm, and to protect it, we must understand that the different periods the pop age goes through create moments of vulnerability that anti-liberal forces try to exploit. Hegel's insights, as we have seen, help us understand why these vulnerabilities occur. Let's go back to the 19th century, to the Modernist period. As mentioned, it was typified by individuals who still believed in the modern ideal of creating a better future, but no longer believed, as thinkers of the novel period did, that humanity is marching towards it. Rather, they believe that the current culture is leading us astray, and that the individual should rebel against it, and use their personal faculties to figure out the truth that will liberate us, thus becoming pioneers for others to follow. The transitional phase between the two periods saw, naturally, the rise of some transitional figures, and one of them was Friedrich Nietzsche. His first works were written during this phase, including a few essays which he named Untimely Meditations, because they went against the spirit of the time. Hegelian thought claimed that one cannot escape the spirit of the time, but Nietzsche disagreed, believing himself to be ahead of his time, writing for people of the future. One of these essays, written in 1874, is called On the Use and Abuse of History for Life, and it shall be the starting point of our discussion of his view of history. In the foreword, Nietzsche mentions that this is another untimely meditation, because here I am trying for once to see as a contemporary disgrace, infirmity, and defect something of which our age is justifiably proud, its historical culture. The historical thinking of the modern age, then, is regarded by Nietzsche as something we should be proud of, and yet it also has downsides, which he wants to highlight and explore. Animals, writes Nietzsche, live unhistorically, reacting to the moment. Humans also have this unhistoric side, reacting through their passions and drives. But humans are also historical beings, as their consciousness perceives itself as living in a continuum, where things change over time. Man cannot help but thinking historically, but in order to be happy, he must learn to forget history for a while, and be driven by his inner powers. In general, man needs both the historic and the unhistoric sides, but the historic must serve the unhistoric. To say it differently, knowledge of history must serve life, must be used in a way that increases the vitality of the individual or the group. There are three ways to view history that serve life. One is the monumental view, in which you idolize great men of the past and see them as models to follow. The second is the antiquarian view, in which you see yourself as belonging to a culture and tradition, and find meaning in the symbols, customs, and traditions of that culture, in celebrating and preserving them. The third is the critical view, in which you look at history critically to find out where things went wrong, in order to put yourself back on the right track. All three views are revitalizing when they are used at the right time, but if they are used at the wrong time, they bring more harm than good. To be healthy and happy, then, the individual or the group must employ all three, and know when to employ each one. But in the modern age, says young Nietzsche, history has become the ruler, the thing that determines our values. From a young age, we are being taught to think historically, that we are part of the progress of civilization, and this has several bad effects. First, instead of being driven by our inner life forces, our inner world is now full of the history we've consumed. And since history is confusing and self-contradictory, it makes our inner world confused. Our personality, as a result, does not grow organically to become deeper and richer, but remains shallow. Secondly, he attacks the belief that today we are more just and moral than the people of the past. This stems from the tendency to look at the people of the past as if they are similar to the people of today, and so their actions look cruel to us. But the people of the past had a different worldview, and to judge their actions correctly, we first need to understand where they were coming from. And herein lies the problem. Today's historian cannot understand the people of the past, because he doesn't think like them. The people of the past were thinking about creating a future. The people of today, because history has been turned into science and viewed as deterministic, think that they cannot affect the course of history, so they don't think about creating a future. This is the third negative outcome of the modern perception of history. It destroys humanity's inner powers, especially the creative power. The fourth negative outcome is that it makes humanity feel old, as if all the great deeds have already been done, and all we have to do now is rest on our laurels. Nietzsche sees in it the reawakening of the Christian belief in the end of days, which leads contemporary culture to feel like it is in descent. This leads to an ironic attitude towards this culture, as if there's nothing worthwhile anymore, which in turn can lead to cynicism towards all values. This is the fifth negative outcome. An even worse version of this, however, is the Hegelian view, which also regards our time in terms of end of days, but not in the Christian terms of the downfall of man, but rather in Aristotelian terms of the actualization of man. This approach, says Nietzsche, deifies history, making it the only authority on values, as if whatever happens is good, and you cannot criticize it with ethical, aesthetic, or religious values. Contemporary thinkers claim that humanity has matured, that we used to be children and now we are men. They admit that great men of the past stood against the tide of time, and thus changed the course of history, but claim that in our time, greatness is found in expressing the spirit of the people, not going against them. This, says Nietzsche, ensures that there will be no more great men. To counter, Nietzsche eulogizes the spirit of youth, a youth that wants to rebel against the time and create something of its own. This spirit, he says, has been corrupted by the current education that teaches the youth to think in a Hegelian manner. We need to bring back interest in art and even in religion to free the youth of this mindset. Once it will be free, it can go back to view history in monumental, antiquarian, and critical ways, and also view history not just as a science but also as an art. That is, finding creative ways of looking at the past and describing it in the form of narratives that turn our existence into an ongoing story, and thus also shapes our future. This can pertain to groups, but Nietzsche focuses mainly on the individual. Everyone should listen to their own inner powers, arrange their inner chaos, and shape themselves as individualists, who don't perceive themselves as servants of historical processes, but use their knowledge of history to strengthen and enrich their individuality. Young Nietzsche, then, already breaks away from the thinking that typified Hegel and Marx. His focus is not on progress towards the future, but on making the most out of the present. But we are still in the transitional phase between the periods, so he still believes that humanity is progressing. After that, however, he radically breaks away. Nietzsche's critical period begins in earnest with the book Human All Too Human, published in 1878. Here, he no longer writes in essay form, but in the form of short aphorisms, each focusing on a single subject, each standing alone. Thus, he breaks away from the notion that the human mind can put all of reality in order. The title of the book expresses his belief that whatever we think of as truth is actually just interpretations that our culture imposed on reality. Everything is perspective. When it comes to history, contemporary historians make the mistake of thinking the humans of the past were the same as they are today, and interpreting their actions accordingly. Actually, every period has its own perspective, and therefore words have different meanings from their meaning in other periods, so we can't fully comprehend what the people of the past were saying, or how they were thinking. This, of course, is a rejection of the aforementioned Hegelian insight that every historical step contains within it all the previous steps, and thus we can fully understand the thinking of the past. Furthermore, while Hegelians believe that the man of today is the ideal that history led to, and judge previous historic periods as stages in his development, Nietzsche regards man as the product of arbitrary historical processes. To understand how we became how we are, we should therefore look for the origins of every aspect of our life, and then trace how they randomly evolved through the ages. Nietzsche, then, no longer believes in progress, or rather, he believes that history is progressing, but humanity isn't necessarily becoming better. Actually, he already senses that we are going in a wrong direction, a direction that weakens humankind. In later books, he would greatly expand on this insight, putting the blame on three main culprits. First, the belief that man can figure out the absolute truth about reality, a belief that led to the formation of concepts that prevent us from properly engaging with the chaotic reality we live in. Secondly, the belief in the existence of soul, as an entity separate from the body, a belief that detached us from nature. And finally, slave morality. I discuss slave morality in detail elsewhere, so we won't expand on it here, but it is basically the morality of the mediocre herd imposed on humanity and stifling great and extraordinary men from doing their thing. All of this led to the decline of humanity. Unfortunately, contemporary humans believe that these three mistakes are actually the truth, the thing history has led to. If we continue to go down this path, warns Nietzsche, we will indeed get to the utopian state that these people espouse, but it will actually be a mediocre and miserable existence. Fortunately, Hegel was wrong in his determinism. All that we said leads to the conclusion that we can change the course of history for the better, if we adopt better perspectives. Progress isn't inevitable, as Hegelians believe, but it is possible, if we turn our energies in positive directions. Instead of looking for truth, we should be looking for interpretations that will enhance the vitality and inner powers of humans. Our reading of history, then, should be directed towards that end. But, hang on, you might say. If everything is perspective, how do we know that something is better than other? Well, according to Nietzsche, we actually do have a measuring rod to determine it. Human history, we learned in the 19th century, goes back millions of years of evolution. What we call civilization is only a tiny fraction of our history. And during those eons of pre-civilization, humankind had developed survival mechanisms that are all still contained in our body. Our body knows what's good for us, and we are rewarded with feelings of vitality and vigor when we do things that are healthy. Humanity keeps making mistakes and adopting unhealthy ideas and concepts, and would have perished already if the body wasn't there to regulate it and occasionally direct us towards creating healthier ideas. But we cannot rely on it forever, since the combined effect of thousands of years of such mistakes has had a weakening effect on the body, as its inner powers were turned against each other, or muzzled by moral laws. To create a healthy and happy humanity, we need to liberate those powers, and find a way to make them work harmoniously. In his later writings, Nietzsche talked about it in terms of nihilism. He distinguished between two forms of nihilism. One form comes when a culture loses its purpose, when its members no longer believe in its higher values and orientations. The forces of anti-life then take over, offering sedatives in the form of ideas that negate nature and the body. It is nihilism, because it leads to the negation of life. But some people, driven by their inner powers, rebel against the values of that culture, trying to form new values based on what they feel inside. This sort of rebellion, in which you reject all existing forms, but you do it in order to create new forms based on what your body tells you is healthy, is what the late Nietzsche calls Dionysian. Forming new values takes time, though, and this time is basically a nihilistic phase, in which these people reject any belief. Culturally, it is felt as a period of breakdown, in which inner forces burst to the surface and shake everything up. In this explosion, a lot of wickedness and ugliness come to the surface as well, but the Nietzschean man tolerates the forms they appear in, understanding that they, too, represent forces that have been repressed, and explores them for anything that can be used to create new values. Eventually, human reason succeeds in creating new values, and a new social harmony, and the new culture is more vital and strong than the culture it replaced, at least until it also loses its power. Unlike Hegel, then, who argues that paradigms replace each other in logical succession, where one paradigm logically leads to the next, Nietzsche argues that there is a period of chaos in which the existing paradigm breaks down, and then we emerge out of the chaos with a new paradigm, connected in some ways to the previous one, but not in a way that is logically deduced from it. And while Hegel believed that the time periods between the paradigm shifts are also characterized by constant progress, Nietzsche believes they are actually periods of slow decline, until the next Dionysian explosion that brings everything back to life. Nietzsche's view is compatible with mine, which I held even before I read him. As a child of the rock and roll period, I know it moved from one Dionysian eruption to the next, from the rock and roll explosion of the 50s to the acid rock of the 60s, to punk in the 70s, and so forth. Every one of these explosions brought with it a lot of ugly stuff, but eventually, what we remember are beautiful and revitalizing music and cultures. The eruptions eventually crystallized in many splendid forms, and a lot of music fans prefer these forms, but I, and many others of that period, always preferred the ecstasy of the early, raw stuff. Reading Nietzsche helped me put this attitude in order, and also refine my approach towards exploring the history of the period. Many who write the history of these musical movements tend to hide the filthy parts, but I, in my YouTube series about them, make a point of showing the filth as well, and how some positives eventually came from it. In 2015, I actually became part of something similar when I aligned myself with the dissident anti-woke movement that emerged out of Gamergate. I did so even though many of its manifestations disgusted me, because I recognized it contained a lot of creativity, critical thinking, quest for justice, and other powers needed to bring liberalism back to life after it was weakened by years of political correctness, postmodernism, critical theories, creationist leftism, intersectionality, and other bad ideas. My early videos were part of the anti-woke explosion, but I always tried to lead out of the nihilism towards positive directions, and search for new values. Back to Nietzsche. As mentioned, he believed that humanity, overall, is declining, but that it isn't necessarily its fate. We can change the course of history, reverse the decline, but not in his time. His time was still too saturated with bad ideas. The only thing for an individual to do is become a free thinker, liberate themselves from these ideas. The free thinker should be a wanderer, never commit to any ideology, but put themselves through spiritual experiments to find out what their body tells them. From that, a community of stronger individuals will emerge, and in the future, they can lead humanity in a better direction. What we should aspire to is becoming more powerful. By that, Nietzsche means that things that used to bring us misery and discomfort would be turned into things that bring us joy. So, rather than trying to eliminate the causes of misery and discomfort, which is what those who believe in progress aim to do, we should find a way to create a new worldview in which those causes work to enhance our life. When we succeed, we achieve what Nietzsche calls self-surpassing, which is the replacement of an old worldview with a new, more powerful one. Self-surpassing creates the Dionysian experience in our body, and Nietzsche considers this experience to be the highest possible form of joy. After that, we continue to live a more happy and elevated life, as our new worldview makes us enjoy the world more. Self-surpassing can be applied even to memories. If we have a bad memory, we can transform it into a good memory, if we create a new worldview that learns from it. Then the memory will be redeemed, remembered not as something bad, but as a necessary learning experience, something we are actually happy that we had. And so, through these self-surpassings, we become stronger and happier over time. But Nietzsche was focused more on the present than on the future. Rejecting the idea of progress altogether, he developed the idea that time is circular. Since time is eternal, but the substance that makes up the universe is not, the history of the universe must repeat itself again and again, which means that the happy earthly life, according to his prescription, is what we should aspire to, because it means we will experience an eternity of happiness. So Nietzsche rejects progress towards a perfect future. Well, not entirely. As mentioned, this philosophy is aimed at individuals, those who are free spirits. Nietzsche calls them either wanderers or seafarers who sail across the tumultuous seas of reality, never finding land. But there is also the knowing thought that maybe, through all those spiritual experiments, we actually will find land one day, a utopian state of human happiness. This is a possibility, but not for our generation. It is something that will come after the work of many generations, which will create new ideas that will gradually transform humanity and make it stronger and happier. And here, the study of history plays a crucial role. To achieve self-surpassing, you have to create a new worldview based on your inner powers. But our language today is rife with concepts that are the result of a subversion of our inner powers, concepts that turn these powers against each other. We should, therefore, look into how these concepts evolved and see where we went wrong. This means that, first, we should not think that our history is just one story, like Hegel thought that it is just the story of one entity called the spirit, but look separately into the history of every idea and every aspect of human existence, even the most mundane ones. Secondly, it means that we should perform what he calls a genealogy. Genealogy means that you don't regard contemporary ideas as an actualization, a completion of what they were in their initial form. Every form an idea took through its history was a complete one, when you understand it in the context of its time. Therefore, you look for the origin of the idea, see it as already complete in the moment of its birth, and then follow how it changed meaning through the ages. In this way, you realize the contingency of these ideas, realize that reality could have been conceptualized differently, and out of that, come up with better, more empowering ideas. If we work on that for generations, we will eventually not only create a stronger and healthier humanity, but also redeem humanity's past, turn the bad things that happened into learning experiences that helped us get to this better stage. Alas, Nietzsche was not understood by the people of his time, and modern thinking twisted his thoughts. In the Modernist Period, he was regarded more as an artist than as a philosopher, and in the late Modernist Period, he was adopted by extreme right-wing movements, especially the Nazis, who connected to his ideas of living a heroic life of constant struggle, of creating your own interpretation of history, of imposing your interpretation on the world to create a more powerful humanity, and more. In short, twisting some of his ideas and ignoring others. Meanwhile, the existentialists latched on to his idea that the thinker should be a wanderer, not committing to any ideology, and to his idea of spiritual experimentation. The inner world of the individual became an entire domain, a domain that you can run away to from the horrors of the outside world. In this inner realm, you are in control of your history, interpret it as you wish, and thus create narratives and make yourself the hero of your own story. Unfortunately, the leading existentialist thinkers, Heidegger and Sartre, regarded the self as something that is detached from the body, alienated from it, and so they had nothing to guide them, and never fully embraced Nietzsche's solutions. Eventually, they both did end up embracing an ideology. Meanwhile, in America, the pop culture of the Hollywood period had its own take on Nietzsche, courtesy of some Jews who countered the Nazi interpretation by creating their version of Nietzschean heroism. The comic book heroes Superman and Captain America were a popularized version of the Nietzschean Superman, and they fought for liberal American values. They laid the ground for the genre of the superhero, a term that Nietzsche coined, but more than that, they showed how much healthier the pop mindset was already, compared to the decaying modern mindset. The rock and roll period was very Nietzschean, sometimes due to his direct influence, sometimes indirectly. The modern mindset was about creating the fully actualized man, and for that, it was believed that certain parts of human nature, those deemed as animalistic and uncivilized, had to be repressed. But the kids born into this period no longer believed in this ideal, and popular music allowed them to give form and expression to repressed sensations and turn them into ecstatic, Dionysian musical styles. The rock and roll period was about the spirit of youth, rebelling against anything the adult world represented, about liberating and celebrating the human body and what can be done with it to achieve elation, about creating Dionysian music and building your identity around it, about individualists living a life of a wanderer, always reimagining and recreating themselves. But while Nietzsche thought it would be an elite of individuals who would do it, Pop culture, by its nature, opened these experiences to everyone. While Nietzsche thought liberalism and democracy are weakening the spirit, the rock and roll period showed how they can be compatible with Nietzschean empowerment. The rock and roll period, for me, fixed Nietzsche. The thing that Nietzsche fails to address is that to be able to live the life he espouses, you first have to have a certain degree of freedom to live in a free society. As an offspring of the rock and roll period, I fight to preserve the free society we were already born into, but beyond that, I think not in terms of liberation, but in terms of empowerment. Empowerment means that you don't just support individuals and groups' right to be free, but also support them as they express those traits that the modern paradigm taught us to repress, because they did not fit with its ideal of the universal man. Alas, in the cyber period, the mindset is very different. When everything we do is mediated by machines, when our existence increasingly takes place in cyberspace, people no longer listen to what their body tells them. They've grown detached from their body and believe they can define themselves any way they want, without any connection to their biological reality. The word empowerment is still popular, more popular than ever, but it has become a hollow word, attached to things in order to sell them. The spirit of this period is not empowering, but weakening, in the Nietzschean sense. Later on, I will offer my solution to this predicament. But first, I want to introduce another philosopher into our discussion. After the death of the modern age, some Europeans realized that American pop culture offers a better alternative, but most European intellectuals kept on thinking along modern terms, trying to adapt them to the new reality. The result was postmodernism, and the most important postmodern thinker was Michel Foucault. Foucault was the man who took on the task that Nietzsche bequeathed to the next generations, the task of performing genealogies in order to rewrite history. Beginning to publish right towards the end of the modern age, Foucault heralded its death by undermining the idea of progress. Taking Nietzsche's advice, he focused on different aspects of human existence, things that historians did not think merited exploration, and showed how they evolved through the years in a different way from what Hegelian thinkers were arguing. History, he showed, is not a linear progression of ideas, but every period is ruled by a paradigm that determines how people think, until, due to arbitrary reasons, the paradigm collapses and gets replaced by a new one, which gives a different meaning to all the old concepts. To understand the ideas of a period, the historian must first unearth its paradigm, like an archaeologist unearthing an entire layer of ground that contains a period, and then proceed to understand these ideas in the context of that paradigm, in the context of how the thinking of that period was oriented. In that, Foucault is a great influence on my work. In 1971, Foucault acknowledged his debt to Nietzsche in an article titled Nietzsche, Genealogy, History. The article basically outlines how genealogy, as a method, differs from how historians previously worked, while grounding it all in Nietzsche's ideas. While historians pretend to assume an objective standpoint, the genealogist realizes that they can offer no more than a perspective, and that their own perspective is determined by the culture they grew up in, and the history that shaped it. Genealogy, says Foucault, examines concepts and ideas, and how they evolved. It rejects the notion that they have an origin that is meta-historical, and thus they remain essentially the same throughout the ages. For instance, the idea that morality is always the same, or that a nation has a certain ideal it has to live by to have an authentic existence. Historians who believe in this kind of origin believe that their job is to describe how it manifests itself in every period while remaining essentially the same, or how it develops and grows towards actualization. The genealogist, in contrast, believes that ideas arise from history, and that they have many points of origin, and change their meaning from period to period. The role of the genealogist is to examine every idea separately, tell the story of how and why it was born, and how and why it changed its meaning through the ages. Finally, the genealogist should also trace how we came to think that our understanding of the idea represents an eternal truth. Genealogy, continues Foucault, dispels the myth of the self as a singular entity. We realize that our identities, both our individual identity and our group identities, are a construct of many different parts that originated at different times. The place where they all mix together is in our body, and the body contains within it all of our history. Our values and beliefs, over time, affect our body, leaving traces in it. In a quasi-biblical passage, Foucault writes, in the name of Nietzsche, that fathers have only to mistake effects for causes, believe in the reality of an afterlife, or maintain the value of eternal truths, and the bodies of their children will suffer. The genealogist, then, looks at the body of the people today, sees what ails it, and searches for the causes. The task, writes Foucault, is to expose a body totally imprinted by history, and the process of history's destruction of the body. And here is where Foucault veers away from Nietzsche. He correctly recognizes the importance of the human body in Nietzsche's thought, but he treats it as a passive thing that is imprinted by the actions of the human spirit. For Nietzsche, the body is the active force, driven by its inner powers. Yes, the ideas created by culture have a long-term effect on it, but its deepest impulses were created over millions of years of evolution that predate human cultures, and they resist unhealthy ideas, pushing us to come up with healthier ones. Foucault ignores this dimension of Nietzsche's thought, so to him, the drama takes place entirely in the realm of the spirit, and the body is just a passive victim of it. One of the outcomes of this belief is that he portrays human nature as extremely malleable, able to change very quickly as the result of changes in culture. Our impulses, for Foucault, are not something that develops over millions of years, but something that can be instilled in us by the culture we grow into. This idea seemed crazy at the time, when most people believed human nature to be unalterable, but in the cyber period, when the human body is being increasingly synthesized with technology, and when people can easily assume any virtual identity they want online, they become very susceptible to it. It gives us new freedoms, for sure, and opens up an exciting array of future possibilities. But if you define yourself in a way detached from your body and your history, I fear the long-term effects would be unhealthy. One place where this difference between Foucault and Nietzsche becomes crucial is in the question of power. For Nietzsche, power is an impulse of the body, and eventually he even identifies the will to power as the most fundamental impulse of all. But this is not relevant to this discussion. Even earlier, he already talks about what he calls the feeling of power, as one of the most joyous sensations contained in our body. This feeling is achieved when you overcome a challenge, and it is one of the things that drive humans to create new ideas and worldviews in their battle with challenges. For Foucault, power is not something internal that drives you, but something external that you feel when you are oppressed by a worldview. All worldviews are interpretations of reality, and those interpretations always work better for some groups than for others, creating inequality and oppression. The story of human civilization is the story of those different interpretations doing battle with each other, to become the dominant interpretation. History, writes Foucault, is not the story of humanity gradually figuring out the truth about itself, or progressing towards greater social harmony. It is the story of going from domination to domination. This leads to a very different understanding of the role of genealogy. For Nietzsche, genealogy is done in order to uncover the forces trapped in the body, to find out where an interpretation was created that channeled these forces in an unhealthy direction, in order to then liberate them from this interpretation, and find a worldview that channels them in a healthier direction. There is always social domination and oppression, yes, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. When you are oppressed by a worldview, it is simply a challenge to overcome, and feel the joy of overcoming it. For Foucault, genealogy is done in order to find where oppression began, and that's to identify the idea that is oppressing a certain group of people. In other words, while Nietzsche's approach inspires us to seek empowerment, Foucault's approach leads us down the path to victimhood. And this path proved to be quite disastrous. The idea that all worldviews are mere interpretations, and we have no way of telling which is better, made truth subordinate to other things. While Foucault still adhered to historical facts, historians who came in his wake believed they had the right to hide, subvert, or invent facts in their fight against the allegedly dominant worldview. Foucault's thinking alone doesn't give you moral license to do so, since you are essentially lying to achieve the domination of your own worldview. But when you combine the influence of Foucault with the influence of Marx, with the idea that the oppressed class is the one representing the truth that will liberate us all, it gives those pseudo-historians license to lie as much as they want, in the name of fighting for the oppressed. Postmodernism ended up, inevitably, in allowing bigotry, quackery, creationist leftism, hate speech, and just overall nastiness to burst to the surface. And the glorification of victimhood ended up in people seeking it, instead of seeking to overcome it. Many so-called historians, nowadays, are just spinning narratives that have no grounding in historical fact, designed to define their group as the victim, which in today's leftist circles is the most privileged position to have. But when humans think of themselves as victims, they develop a victim's mentality, and this mentality leads only to misery. The way out of this mess is not to go back to believing in eternal truths, as some conservatives suggest. It may work for some, but many of us can no longer honestly believe in their existence. My solution is to regard history the way Foucault does, as random shifts between paradigms that create all sorts of dominations and oppressions, but to add to it the Nietzschean perception that our body contains impulses that are deeper than these paradigm shifts. These impulses are not eternal truths. They also change over time, but such a change takes eons, and in the meantime, we can regard them as the truth that should guide us. Apart from that, of course, we should denounce and renounce the Marxist idea that the oppressed represents the truth, allowing us to lie on its behalf, and instead maintain intellectual honesty which adheres to historical facts. The place where all these questions become most acute, nowadays, is the current debate around transgender identities. Gender dysphoria is a real thing, but the idea that we can just decide to change our identity, and our nature will yield to our will, might lead people to make injudicious decisions, in their belief that changing their gender would solve all their problems. And the idea that we should defend victims and fight against oppression is leading to the censoring of those who try to warn against the dangers of their actions. This brought a right-wing backlash, which allowed for the rise of voices who refuse to acknowledge the phenomenon of transgenderism altogether. All of this has actually had a severe weakening effect on liberal society, and we need to find a synthesis that will solve this problem. My approach is that we should allow this chaotic explosion to happen, let everyone speak, and listen to what they are telling us about nature. We have testimonies from transgendered people, telling us what it feels like to have gender dysphoria, what it feels like when you are not believed, what it feels like after you had your gender change, and what it feels like when, alas, your body eventually informs you that you got it wrong. We also have testimonies from cis people, telling us what it feels like when trans activists attack their gender perception on spaces. And we also have testimonies from the past, telling us how the issues of gender and gender dysphoria were viewed in different cultures. The solution has to come from a synthesis of all these sources, and my videos on the subject try to propose such a synthesis. As for history, we should look not for the history of oppression, but for the history of expression, the history of art and culture. When we experience art made in previous periods, we don't really get it. It may be pretty to us, but since our mindset is different, we don't get our minds blown by it. In my series about the musical movements of the rock and roll period, I try to reconstruct the mindset of that period, so the viewers can appreciate how powerful the music was at the time. Foucault also reconstructs the period when he discusses art, but he tends to analyze the worldview expressed through the art, whereas I try to give expression to the Dionysian, to how the art piece exploded what came before and brought what was hidden to light. When you explore the history of art in such a manner, when you do genealogy in order to understand the mind-blowing power of the art when it was created, it has a revitalizing effect on the spirit. The last thinker I want to discuss also began writing towards the end of the modern age, in the transitional phase between the Hollywood and rock and roll periods. Marshall McLuhan is someone I began to read seriously only recently, when I realized that my explorations increasingly lead me to talk about the role media plays in shaping a period. I did not have time yet to go deeply into his writings, but I'd like to discuss his claim that the medium is the message. Human history, says McLuhan, is shaped by the media that humans create. Humans create mediums that are extensions of their body, and these mediums, over time, bring a change in culture, and eventually even a change in human nature. For a very short demonstration, let's examine how media affected the conflict we discussed, the struggles of black people in America. Here's how I employ McLuhan in my analysis of history. Once the modern age started to work on creating heaven on earth, it brought back the human body into the picture. No longer seen as a prison that we have to escape in order to get to heaven, the human body started to be regarded as a thing that needs to be developed along with the human spirit. By the late 19th century, when Nietzsche and others brought back the Greek ideal of the beautiful body, sports became a big thing. In the Modernist period, sports were no longer just a hobby, but started to be organized in leagues and clubs. By the late Modernist period, sports became a symbol of something else. As race theory started to spread, sports were being viewed as competition to show which race is superior. Which European race should be the ideal for the rest of humanity? The tragedy that befell Europe in this period was manifested through its sports. But race, of course, was a big thing in America as well. In 1910, in what was dubbed the fight of the century, black boxer Jack Johnson defeated white man James Jeffries in the battle for heavyweight world championship. The fight was caught on film, and when it was shown in Nickelodeons across the country, it thrilled black audiences and sparked race riots. The US government reacted by passing a law that forbade boxing matches to be filmed. Government still had control over media back then. But then came the pop age, and changed everything. The Hollywood period also regarded sports as a competition between races, but turned it into entertainment. Starting in 1921, when many people purchased radios to listen to a live broadcast of a Jack Dempsey heavyweight title match, radio stopped being a curiosity owned only by enthusiasts. Soon, there was a radio in every home, and radio broadcasts became syndicated. For the first time in history, people from different places could experience the same event as it happened, and this broke the linear progression of time, affecting the change from the modern consciousness, which thought in historical terms, to the pop consciousness, that focused on the moment. And it also affected the ability of governments to control the information given to the people. The nature of this effect, argues McLuhan, depends on what the consciousness of the culture is when the medium is introduced. Radio, he writes, brought back tribalism, and in places such as Germany, it allowed a totalitarian leader like Hitler to control the public. But in countries where the consciousness was already more individualized, due to the legacy of previous mediums, it had different effects. Going back to our discussion, the rise of pop culture in America meant that radio had to cater to the demands of the people. Among other things, the people wanted live broadcasts of sports events, which meant that you could no longer suppress it when black athletes were triumphant. There was still an attempt to prevent blacks from competing, and the Hollywood period is the story of how black athletes gradually got into all the sports and excelled in them. By the end of the Hollywood period, the end of the modern age, the race battle in sports to show which European race is superior ended, ironically, with the total victory of the black race. Meanwhile, the rock and roll period was already in full swing and brought a new medium with it: television. With television, you could also see the athletes up close, experience their struggle to overcome their rival, be moved by every powerful emotion they displayed, and enjoy their virtuosity. The experience was thrilling, and it turned sports events into an epic drama experienced worldwide as it was happening. The totalitarian communist regimes of the Eastern Bloc were still thinking in old modernist terms, and believed domination in sports, manifested in how many medals you won in the Olympic Games, would show that they're the ideal everyone should aspire to. But Western sports were offering fun, and individualistic heroes who won kids over with their personality, including the kids of the Eastern Bloc. Since black athletes dominated, the battles between them became battles over black identity, and made many of them superstars, epic heroes idolized by all. It was one of the things that created the Nietzschean, empowering consciousness of the period, and it had a lot of influence on the acceptance of blacks into the American nation. In the cyber period, sports lost their aura. Youth is no longer celebrated, bodily activity is not that important, and television is no longer the thing that brings us together and produces cultural heroes. Many youngsters prefer esports that don't involve the body. As a result, blacks lost the edge that they had. Black athletes today are not the culture heroes they once were. There's no contemporary equivalent to Jesse Owens, Muhammad Ali, Pelé, or Michael Jordan. Our time is bereft of models of black empowerment, and this is one of the reasons to the rise in black victim mentality. Again, McLuhan doesn't say that the medium works the same on all cultures. The introduction of radio worked differently on Germany and on America, because Germans and Americans had a different mindset. However, McLuhan's point is that the medium works in mysterious ways, and affects us in ways we don't realize. Artists, journalists, polemicists, and politicians use the mediums to convey messages, but what they don't realize is that the medium itself has more power to change society than anything they can convey through it. This is what he means by "the medium is the message." Radio may have helped Hitler assert his personality over the Germans, but because of the nature of radio, it also allowed those under German occupation to develop a consciousness that focuses on the now, not on the 1,000-year Reich. Jazz music, the most anti-Nazi thing, made its way across the airwaves into occupied Europe, allowing people to mentally resist the Nazis. The mediums created by liberal culture eventually brought liberalization. This idea, it seems, is going to be tested in our time, in a very interesting and fateful way. I am talking about TikTok. TikTok is a medium created by the Chinese, which has become the main medium of expression for today's youth. But there are two types of TikTok. One used in China, where the algorithms are designed to lead the viewers to content that the Chinese government deemed educational and wholesome. And the TikTok marketed to the rest of the world, where the algorithm seems to be designed to lead the viewers to consume idiocy. Analysts see this as part of China's attempt to take over the world while keeping their population under control. But if McLuhan is correct, then the difference in content won't matter much. TikTok will affect the Chinese people in much the same way it affects the rest of the world, and the Chinese government might come to find out that it changed their population in a way they did not intend. To summarize, my view on history is close to Nietzsche's. I believe history should serve life, serve what we do in the present. All the advices that Nietzsche gave on the subject still hold, and they are all contained in his book Thus Spake Zarathustra, of which I did a line-by-line analysis on my second channel. So, if you haven't already, head over there once you've finished watching this. Then again, we live in a world different from Nietzsche's, and to fully implement his wisdom in our time, we need to think critically of the period we are in, understand its inner workings. Nietzsche didn't give much thought to discerning between historical periods, and left it to us to make the distinctions. For this, I refer mainly to two other thinkers, Hegel and Foucault. While I reject Hegel's idea of inevitable progress, and believe it is no longer useful for our time, I do believe that his insights give us a way to think critically of the present, and understand the historical processes that are affecting us, as I have shown. Whereas Foucault shows us how to think critically of the past, how to perform genealogies to find out how we got to where we are, and consequently heal what ails our time. Finally, another thing Nietzsche didn't give a lot of thought to is the effect of new mediums on our spirit, because he lived before, or right on the cusp of, the avalanche of never-ending new technologies that has ruled our life ever since. Every period has media that shapes it, and the new mediums help bring about a new period. Marshall McLuhan started the philosophical exploration into this phenomenon, and I intend to carry on the torch. Synthesizing these four thinkers together is how I perform my explorations into the history of the pop age. This is the wisdom I wanted to impart to you in this video. Now go out and make history.